Welcome everyone to the Simply Trade News Roundup. It is currently Thursday, the 17th of April. I'm just letting you know because, things will change. So just dating the episode for you instantly. My name's Annik. I'll be your host today. All right. Well, today I'm bringing you some news and then we'll get into the big stuff because I have an interesting guest with me today. But before we get into that stuff, I just want to let you know of some news. Right now, the U.S. has imposed tariffs as high as 145% on goods imported from China. China has kind of reciprocated this move. So doing business with China right now is tough, and I feel for everyone that is doing that right now. These tariffs are hitting small businesses, I feel, the most. I've seen a lot on social media. I've seen a lot on TikTok, and which I usually never saw that kind of stuff. And now small businesses are coming forward and saying, if we're doing business, even not just with China, but also Europe, things are getting tough and people don't want to buy your product, even if it's an American company. So that's kind of been challenging. Also, Temu and Shein are raising their prices as of April 25th due to the new tariffs. That'll be an interesting move. And they similarly brought out a statement, which was kind of off. I've seen a lot of it on LinkedIn. So dive deeper if you want to know more about that. Also, there's other tariffs on the horizon, which right now we're experiencing the 25% on steel and aluminum on multiple countries, which will be hit with additional tariffs such as lumber and semiconductors. That is the news I have for you right now as of current. I'm sure there's more stuff that I have not reported, but also there's just so much information out there. But that is where we are at right now. Okay, now we're getting to the good stuff. I have a guest here with me. Actually, in fact, he is in the same city as me. We're sadly not recording in the same studio because our studio is only made for one person as of now. Hopefully that'll change maybe in the future. But we have David. Okay, well, I'm gonna try this. I'm gonna really try my accent here because I've been in El Paso for quite a while. So David Reyes Arteaga, is that right? Did I do it right?
And that's a good work with ours right there.
Right? Well, welcome. So he's a branch manager at Kühne. Okay, should I say that in German? Kühne and plus Nagel, and president of the West Texas, New Mexico Customs Brokers Association. Welcome. Thank you so much for joining me from the same town, different office. How are you today?
I'm doing very well. Thank you for having me, Annik.
I'm so glad. I'm actually lucky because I think I have tried to get, you on the podcast and I didn't get a response. And I was like, okay, I won't do it again. And then we saw each other at a conference and I'm like, you did not answer my message. And, I get a lot of not answers. I mean, I throw a lot of requests out there that I feel I want them on the podcast. Be honored, I guess. I'm kidding. Take this really lighthearted, okay? But I think we'll have a good conversation just because there's so much going on right now, and specifically with the border of Mexico. Even though we've seen the tariffs calm down a little, we're still going through the 25%, correct? The aluminum and steel. Well, we're still seeing backups. We're seeing more investigations. So day to day at the border. So I kind of want to ask you about your job. What are you currently seeing? How is your job easier right now? Is it harder? And what do you even do? Let's just lay the groundwork here.
Yeah, definitely. So I'm a licensed custom broker. So basically, we are the entity which is basically the middleman between importers and Customs and Border Protection to enable the legitimate flow of trade into the U.S. and out of the U.S. We've become very, very popular lately.
Yeah.
Everyone wants a piece of the
commodity
broker.
Right now.
Yeah, we are. Yes, definitely. Sorry for not answering the message. But there was a lot of people looking for a lot of information.
I bet. Okay.
Definitely, the tariffs is not something new for us. We saw it on the first Donald Trump term, where Section 301 was established. And this was, the precedent of this policy of tariff and protectionism, right? Back then, it was something that we had not seen at that scale before. It brought this balance into the trade. However, it quickly became, a day-to-day thing that everyone accepted it. Everyone knew how to use. In this second term, we started seeing, out of nowhere, specifically, tariffs against our largest trade partner, which is Mexico. And then our friendliest neighbor, right, which is Canada. And that really destabilized the market. We normally knew that the war trade with China was going on, but then doing it to our best allies and neighbor was not a normal thing. And this basically made that a lot of items changed. A lot of companies that were willing to import into Mexico stopped some projects. There was a lot of initiatives that were developed recently to try to minimize the tariff impact on the goods that were sold to the US.
Mm-hmm.
Afterwards, we saw that for 2 days, the tariffs went into effect, and that's when everyone went a little crazy, right?
Yeah.
This was not just a bluff. This actually happened. So a lot of companies...
And I have to jump in real quick on that because there's a lot of people I talk to that are like, it's all talk, where they're negotiating. And I'm like, being in the industry, obviously, and I hear you talking about it. You tell us that no, businesses really had to deal with it. So especially, I think in El Paso here at the border, you see a lot of coming through every day. I mean, I drive by the border and I see trucks and trucks and trucks coming. How was that affected? Was there a stoppage? Did less trucks come through, or was it just a regular day, or what did you see, or did you notice anything?
Yeah, so in the El Paso region, we cross on a daily basis about 3,000 trucks plus. During those 2 days, there was a lot of speculation that these tariffs would go away once a negotiation took place. There was a lot of companies that stopped their imports completely in order to wait on that negotiation to happen.
Yeah.
And there were some other customers and other importers that their product just couldn't wait for that to happen. They feed into large production lines, automotive production lines, on time or just in time production lines, which if they would have waited, they would have impacted further. We've heard stories of, companies spending over $15 million just in those 2 days trying to import product based on the 25% duty set to Mexico.
And USMCA is a real thing. Most of the goods that are coming across, I don't know, whatever border you work with mostly, or what, importers, those goods are usually under USMCA, correct?
Yes, correct. So, the advantage of Mexico is their manufacturing facilities are right across the border. The EMEX program allows these transnationals to open up manufacturing across the border, bring the raw materials in without the outlay of Mexican duties and fees, produce something, basically change their harmonized tariff code, or input enough regional value content to make it a Mexican good. Once that Mexican good is ready to export, it is declared as Mexican and then further on imported into the United States. Normally, USMCA preference was the norm, or there were some products that even didn't carry any normal duty regardless of USMCA special programs indicator. So there were a lot of companies that did not have all of the backup documents and so on and so forth to prove that they were USMCA goods. And once this hit, a lot of internal work had to be done within these companies to identify and classify these goods as US.
And being in El Paso, we're so close to the border. Does it hit even harder for you? I mean, I feel like you work with a lot of importers and businesses in El Paso, correct? Or is that, or no?
Yeah, no, definitely. Our community has a lot of synergy. Mm-hmm. If one city gets a cold, the other one gets pneumonia. It's basically it's basically the synergy that we have, right? If something affects the supply chain in Mexico, we will get the backlash of it in El Paso. Across the border in Ciudad Juarez, 350 manufacturing facilities plus. Chihuahua has over 300 plus. And these all feed basically into distribution into El Paso, right? It touches home because we're very used to USMCA and the great relationship between US and Mexico being, very harmonious. Once we saw that there was added complexity and definitely that touch of, protectionism,
Yeah.
mm, especially, setting these tariffs to your biggest partner, which is Mexico. A lot of business struggled. They had to take quick decisions. They had to stop projects. And some of those projects are still, up in the air, waiting on the decision of the executive.
Yeah, that's crazy to hear, especially, and obviously this podcast is based in people from the United States listen, and some of them might not even know anything about El Paso. But I think it's interesting because, my news is kind of like, I kind of want to touch on more different things. We've been talking about tariffs for so long. And even though this goes into tariffs, I think it's interesting to see the news of like a border city and how it's being impacted being so close to Mexico. And I hope this is, information that people out there can use, and because there's so many other cities like El Paso.
Mhm.
And I kind of want to touch on the West Texas New Mexico Customs Brokers Association. So you're the president. How has that helped you? Or, how would that help brokers in this sense? Because, with all this, what is happening right now, and it's still going on, how can people use this association, or brokers use this association to get through these kind of things, especially being at the border?
Yeah. So basically, our association serves as a liaison between importers, between CBP. We attack room for improvement in trade. We attack opportunities with CBP where we see that we can participate and improve, times, improve practices, improve document and transactions, and so on and so forth. Here in El Paso, we have a smaller broker population compared to, for example, Laredo.
Mhm.
But we have a very good mix of, local heroes, which are companies that decided to open up their brokerage practice and then integrated warehousing, transportation, and then others, which are multinational companies, your big freight forwarders, right? And it's a very balanced market here. We're able to offer very good options to the different importers. As an association, we aim for being relevant and keeping the customs brokerage business extremely relevant. Lately, we've become very popular with importers because we're able to provide them with different strategies on now how to, avoid the payment of duties, because it's, you just have to, but
Yeah.
basically to mitigate it through different practices, through foreign trade zones, bonded warehouse, and also to improve their cash flow as well. Another important topic is, we've been involved heavily in several crises, like the migrant crisis that happened in the southern border. We had
Yeah.
been in
How does
communication
that
with.
affect trade? Is that affecting trade like immensely right now still?
At the moment, no, it's been reduced heavily. There were days that, thousands of people would arrive into our borders, and the problem was that several resources were being allocated to the processing of migrants. But
Yeah.
that has, my kudos to CBP. They did a tremendous job in handling that crisis.
Mhm.
And we were involved always in communication with them.
Were you as a broker? You were as a broker, really? How
Yeah,
come?
we were involved with them because we were the communicators between the importers. So we tried to tell our importers when to ship, where to ship, where not to ship, based on the different allocation of resources that they had. Added to this, we participated in several work tables with the West Texas Advisory Board, led by the field director here in El
Mhm.
Paso for the El Paso field office. And together with carriers, Mexican brokers, large importers, and so on and so forth, we were able to document some strategies to improve the flow.
Okay, that is so interesting. I did not know that. But I have in the past talked about how CBP obviously moves with like immigration and then also trade, and how right now that is so interconnected. And I think it's interesting that you bring that up, because specifically being in El Paso and so many people crossing every day, and some are crossing legally, some are not. There's always a differentiation because a lot of people go to school here too, or they work in the United States. So it's interesting how that affects trade. So there's a few, I think we can talk a little bit of updates right now. So we talked a lot about how it's been and, in the past, and how kind of we moved to this place. I know you don't probably have a comment on this, but I kind of want to lead into the last conversation with this. So I read this article that Mexico is halting fuel imports at the Texas border, which you said is definitely on the Mexican side, right? I mean, that is happening on the Mexican side. So I'm just wondering, do you see any halts right now? Do you see a lot of more investigation right now? Do you see things moving smoothly right now, or is it going slower, or what have you been experiencing at this moment?
Yeah, we see a very constant flow of merchandise here in the El Paso area. We have received some feedback on some of these smaller ports that, there's several inspections going on. I believe the fuel inspections is mostly regarded to compliance in the Mexican side.
Okay.
Just to confirm that the right amount of fuel is being imported.
I see.
The Mexican government is focusing up a lot in compliance specifically, right? And imposing more regulation on the imports of goods, and also monitoring those goods. Within the plans that were issued by the Mexican government, it's very explicit, right, that they're looking to collect on duties and fees that are not necessarily being paid, right? So that's probably the background of those inspections that you see.
Okay. Also, so I read this thing. So it was I read most of my stuff on LinkedIn because I follow friends with so many like trade experts, and they share everything. I don't even need to get into the news. Like I have everything summarized. It's perfect. And then dive deeper into anything. And there was a discussion on, there's tariffs obviously happening at this moment, but how is CBP really acknowledging these tariffs right now? Because there's so, it was tariffs on, tariffs off. And obviously you have to pay those kind of duties, but is it being reported right now? Is CBP really tracking those tariffs at this moment already?
Yeah. CBP has done, to my knowledge, everything right now is being triggered by a X post, right? By the president.
Yeah.
Suddenly we get the percentage of duties by a post instead of by an actual news outlet or like an official post from CBP.
But you obviously have to wait for the EO, right? You have to wait for the executive order, right? Because that's another thing. It's like I've talked to Hugo, the last news episode, and he was like, we need to stop looking at all these different kinds of news. We need to, even though that is the first place where we see it, right? But the executive orders are the actual things that we really need to worry about, Because there can be a lot in a post, but there can be whole other stuff in the executive order.
Yeah, no, definitely. Once the executive order is published, then we see, the CSMS, which is the outlet, the official outlet of CBP to communicate these changes and provide these guidelines. They have done a very good job, I think, of providing the guidelines and also the exceptions, what can be done, what cannot be done. The only item, right, it's that because it is so quick, systems have to get acquainted to it. Programming has to be done for us to comply with those. Just to give you an example, right? For brokers specifically, it has become a challenge to document all of these additional duties because every additional duty is basically a new HTS. So if you were used to, an invoice with 4 lines, at a minimum, you'll enter 3 lines instead of 1. So that becomes, cumbersome. It adds labor to the process. And you have to monitor each and every line because it is linked to the payment of a duty. And obviously, we have to stay in our toes so we can have our ABI system feed those changes into the system so we can submit the entries.
Yeah.
And obviously, our staff has to be well trained to identify which new complementary HTSs they have to use.
I love that you mentioned training. I think training is so important, especially right now. You do not want to not be trained, right? Okay, to round this up, do you have any other comments, news, or anything that you feel like needs to be mentioned?
Right now, everything changes by the minute.
Yeah.
I think that there is a lot of news and there's a lot of speculation on how these tariffs might impact. We saw it back in, the first term of Trump where Section 301 came on board, where we did see an increase in inflation, especially if these tariffs remain active for a while.
I heard tomatoes are going to be hit April 25th, I believe. So are there a lot of tomatoes coming across from Mexico?
Yeah, definitely a lot of produce coming through Mexico.
Well, they said 20%, I think. I believe it was 20 to 25% on tomatoes. So starting April 20th, I believe. And I think they'll be excluded. I don't even know if they're subject to USMCA and anything. But yeah, I think that is what I saw today.
Yeah, if the product is wholly obtained, that means fruit or minerals or anything at Mexico, it will probably apply USMCA, which is, an advantage. But at the same time,
I think I read that it's not going to be subject, that it's going to be, he's definitely going kind of around the USMCA. I don't know. I saw this in the news, and if it is true, then I know El Paso will be on a tomato shortage, right?
Yeah, for sure.
But
all the U.S. is going to have an issue with tomatoes and avocados.
No, I love avocados and I love tomatoes. That doesn't sound like a fun sandwich to eat after that.
Yeah, definitely.
After these tariffs are hit. Well, you know what? I appreciate you coming on so much and talking kind of giving us the update on and what's happening at the border and what we've been facing. And future-wise, we can't really talk because we don't know, but I think there's a fun saying is you need to look at the history to make a next step. And I think if we look at the history and if that's going to repeat itself, we know exactly what is coming. But yeah, thank you so much. And luckily or not luckily, unfortunately, we have really sucky weather today. And as I was going to tell you to enjoy this weather, which we usually have beautiful weather here at the border.
Yeah, we do.
But we've been having I guess you have to enjoy a little bit dust.
Yeah, we're just like Dubai with shorter buildings. That's what I tell people.
That's terrible.
Yeah.
And no water. We have no water.
Yeah, no water. Also.
Well, we have a lot of desert though. Well, I want to thank you, David, so much for coming on the Simply Trade podcast. And all y'all listeners, thank you so much for listening. It's seriously been a pleasure. And yeah, thank you for doing that. And we will be back next week. Enjoy your Easter. It's Easter. Tomorrow's Good Friday, and then we have Easter weekend. That should be fun. So I hope you enjoy that, David. And again, thank you so much for coming on. And we'll see each other soon, I guess, at the next conference, maybe. Or maybe in El Paso. Who knows? Yeah,
absolutely. Whatever you need on your podcast. And if any of the listeners want more information, we're always free to discuss this ever-changing tariff market and so on.
Seriously. Okay. Yeah. Note on that. Okay, everyone subscribe and follow us on LinkedIn, do all the good things, and we'll see you next week. Bye.
Thank you very much for joining us. Simply Trade is brought to you by the generous contributions of Global Training Center. You can follow the show and GTC on LinkedIn or Twitter and other social networks. Make sure you check out the show notes in the description for a full rundown of today's show with all the important links. Also, make sure that you share this with a friend and subscribe on your favorite streaming platform. We really like hearing from you. If you enjoyed the show, make sure to rate and review wherever you listen to this podcast. If you or someone you know would like to be a guest in the show or would like to sponsor Simply Trade or suggest any topic you would like for us to discuss, please contact us via email at simplytrade@globaltrainingcenter.com or you can DM us on Twitter at simplytradepod. Thank you again for the privilege of your time. Happy trading. Simply Trade is not a law firm or an advisor. The topics and discussions conducted by Simply Trade hosts and guests should not be considered and is not intended to substitute legal advice. You should seek appropriate counsel for your own situations. These conversations and information are directed towards listeners in the United States for informational, educational, and entertainment purposes only and should not be substituted for legal advice. No listener or viewer of this podcast should act or refrain from acting on the basis of information on this podcast without first seeking legal advice from counsel. Information on this podcast may not be up to date depending on the time of publishing and the time of viewership. The content of this posting is provided as is. No representations are made that the content is error-free. The views expressed in or through this podcast are those of the individual speakers, not those of their respective employers or Global Training Center as a whole. All liability with respect to actions taken or not taken based on the contents of this podcast are hereby expressly disclaimed.